Alright, the Zabbix API. The Zabbix Server also has an application programming interface, API. This allows you to programmatically configure and retrieve data from the Zabbix Server. Now the reason for using the API is that you either want to create your own custom interface for your Zabbix Server, example a new web interface or simplified, or specializes in a particular area. You want to create an iOS or Android app, or you want to integrate into another monitoring system. In the previous Grafana videos, that was an example of using the API. So in this example, we'll connect to our API, our Zabbix API, using curl commands there. So here's an example here. We'll run those on one of our SSH clients. Then we'll look at little test API form that you can experiment with. It will test and print out curl statements for you. We'll also try out a Python example so we can sort of understand how you might want to use this if you're writing a Python script. And then we'll look at it in slightly more detail in terms of user permissions. Okay, so let's get started. Before we can make any API calls, we'll need an authentication token. We'll first need to call this method, user login here. There's some sample JSON, that's JavaScript object notation. That's what the API expects here in the data parameter. There, just formatted JSON. For the purposes of this exercise, my username is admin and my password is simply password. So I should be able to just copy that directly. And here is my Zabbix server URL. You'll need to put your own in. Let's try that out. So I'm just using my Raspberry Pi here. I'll just paste that, enter, and that's a successful login. I've gotten my authentication token there. I'm just going to keep a record of that, paste that into Notepad, like so. So I'll need that for the remainder of the calls. Going back here, example response, result, and in my example, that's the token. Like I say, you'll need the token for all other calls to the API apart from user login. So let's get a list of the hosts, for example. So here's the JSON that it requires. The method is host.get, and these are the parameters: output, host ID, and host, and some extra information on select interfaces. And here's my authentication token here. So if we look at the first one, user login, we don't need to put an authentication token, but for all other calls we do. We need an authentication token. So I'm just going to copy this example curl here, this one, put it into Notepad, and just replace this here, and replace this here with the valid token. Now my URL has already been set. You'll have to set your own. So we can just copy that now straight into Raspberry Pi. If I press enter, okay, it's now given me a list of all my hosts. We'll use the tool in a moment to make that a little bit easier to read. Okay, so, and it just printed that out here. Here's an example response here for you on the web page as well. Now another thing here in this, there's a parameter here called ID. This can be anything you like. In this example, I've just used the number 1, and down here I've just used the number 2, and you'll get that ID back in your response here, say ID 2. Now, if you wanted to, you could just put a date time stamp in there. Then you'd be able to match up requests and responses. Okay, so that's very good. So what we'll do now, rather than me running curl requests in the SSH like this and it being quite hard to read, we'll run our curl requests in the simple API test form.